Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Vov Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Lamed Vov Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara previously on the top of the Amud had brought a bryce in regards to Meiser Sheni. Can one use Meiser Sheni to fulfill his mitzvah of Achilas Matzah on the first night of Pesach? There's a machloikis. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says he cannot, because when it comes to the lechem oini, that can be eaten by aninus, but Meiser Sheni cannot be eaten by aninus ela besimcha. Rabbi Akiva argues, and he says we have a ribui of matzos to include Meiser Sheni. Now the Gemara brings a brayso in regards to bikurim, and here everybody agrees that you cannot use the grains, specifically wheat and barley, for your achilas matzah on Leil HaSeder. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon, Yachol yoytzei adam yidei chavasai bikurim. I might think, says the Brisa, that you can use mekayim, your mitzvah of achilas matzah, using the bikurim grains. Now bikurim is of the shiva meaning, the first fruits that are brought for a person who is a landowner. He brings them to Yerushalayim, and then he puts them on the mizbech and gives them to the kohen. So we're talking about a kohen who received this bikurim of the 7 species. We're talking about specifically, again, chita or sa'ara. And now the Bryce is asking, can that kohen use the bikurim of chita and sa'ara for his matzos on Leil HaSeder? The Bryce brings a pasuk, in all of your dwellings you shall be able to eat your matzos. Matzah hanecheles b'kol moshvoseichem yatzu bikurim she'ein nechelim b'kol moshvoseichem ela b'Yushalayim. Therefore, since bikurim can only be eaten in Yerushalayim, it's excluded from being able to use it for your mitzvah of matzah. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and those are the words of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Akiva, he says, indeed, I agree that a kohen cannot use bikurim for his achilas matzah. However, from a different limud. And he says, matzah umorer, I have a comparison, a hekesh, as the pasuk says, matzah umorer yoichluhu. So therefore, matzah is compared to morer. Ma morer she'eno bikurim, just as morer is not of the bikurim, af matzah cannot be, she'eno bikurim, cannot be made with those things that are of bikurim. Ima, that's how Rabbi Akiva learns, and therefore it's excluded from being able to use the bikurim from achilas matzah. Now Rabbi Akiva asks on his own limud, Ima morur she'ein b'mino bikurim. We go one step further. Morur is not even something that has a species of bikurim. So af matzah she'ein b'minim bikurim. Then we'll say that no matzah can ever be used, can ever be baked with one of the species of bikurim. Namely, you cannot bake matzahs with chita or sarah, with wheat or with barley. On top of Lamed Vav Amud Beis, oitzi chitim v'sorin she'ein b'minim bikurim. That would be the hemshech of such a comparison between moror and matzah. Talmud loymar, matzah is riba. For that we have a limud, says Rabbi Akiva. No, you could, yes, use chita and sarah for your matzos, and we're only left with excluding bikurim. That cannot be used for your matzos. Ask the Gemara now. Ad kan the braysa. I matzos riba. If Rabbi Akiva learns a ribui of matzos, then afilu bikurim nami. Then let him also include the matzos that would be baked with bikurim, wheat and barley. In other words, not just to include that in general we can go ahead and bake matzos with wheat and barley, but even the bikurim can be used because we have a ribui of matzos. Says the Gemara, Hadar be Rabbi Akiva. Indeed, Rabbi Akiva was chayzer boy from this limud of learning out matzah from moror. And he learns that bikurim is excluded. One cannot use bikurim for his matzos, just as Rabbi Yossi Aglili does. Detanya, Yochol Yetze Adam Yedei Chavasa b'bikurim. I might think that one can bekayim his matzos with bikurim. In all of your dwellings, you shall eat matzos. Matzah hanecheles bekol moshavos. Matzah that can be eaten in all of your dwellings. Yatzu bikurim she'ena necheles ella bekol moshavos ella b'Yushalayim. Excluding bikurim, because bikurim can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. It cannot be eaten elsewhere. And therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva goes with Rabbi Yossi's limud. He was choizer boy. Yochel, I might think she'ani moitzi af meiser sheni. You might think that I also come to exclude meiser sheni. That means to say that meiser sheni, Rabbi Akiva says, can also not be used for my matzos. Now again, we said there was a machloikis whether meiser sheni can be used or not. Rabbi Yosef HaGlili is of the opinion that it cannot be used. But Rabbi Akiva does say a ribuy of matzos to include the meiser sheni. So now he asks, Yocha, I might think shani moitzi af meiser sheni, that it's also excluded. Talmud loyma matzos riba. Therefore, I have a ribuy to include the matzos that are baked with meiser sheni grain. Ask the Gemara on Rabbi Akiva, Umayra isa l'rabois meiser sheni u'lahoitzi bikurim. Ask the Gemara, how does Rabbi Akiva know to include meiser sheni with this ribui, but to exclude bikurim? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the ribui of matzos come to include bikurim, and meiser sheni is excluded. Explains the Gemara, Mar ba'ani meiser sheni. I come to include meiser sheni, says Rabbi Akiva, sheyesh lo heter b'kol moishvois, because it has the heter that can be in all dwellings. Kid Rabbi Elazar, like Rabbi Elazar explains. Rabbi Elazar explains that there are certain circumstances that permit you to even eat meiser sheni outside of Yerushalayim. Although the typical usage is that one is required to bring the meiser sheni into Yerushalayim and eat it there, but there's certain circumstances that there's an exception. Umoitzi ani bikurim she'ein lahem heter b'kol moshavos. Whereas when it comes to bikurim, there's never an exception. When it comes to bikurim, one must always consume the bikurim. The kohen must always eat the bikurim in Yerushalayim. Now he explains the limit where we know that indeed there's an exception when it comes to meiser sheni that one can sometimes eat even outside of Yerushalayim. Domer Rabbi Elazar explained, Minayin lemeiser sheni shenitma shepoidi noisoi afilu b'Yerushalayim. Where do we know, he asks, when it comes to meiser sheni that becomes tamei, that one can poide that meiser sheni even while he's in Yerushalayim, whereby he'll be able to eat outside of Yerushalayim. The pasuk talking about when a person lives in a distance from Yerushalayim, whereby it's cumbersome for him to bring his tevuah, his crops, to Yerushalayim as meiser sheni, so he's able to be poide them. So the pasuk says lo suchal se'eso. The pasuk pshat means that he's not able to carry it so easily. Therefore, he's able to poide it onto a coin with a tzura. However, he makes a drush, kilo sucho se'eso refers to food. I'm not able to eat it. Ve'ein seis ela achila shene'emar. I'll bring you a proof that refers to not being able to eat it. In this case, it becomes tamei. Shene'emar vayisa mas ois me'eis ponov. There, when it comes to the Yosef and his brothers, there refers to the masos, the portions from before him. In other words, we see that the portions of food is a lashon of masos, of se'es. Minayin, now goes back. Mayin shamas lei de omar b'maiser sheni nofik bei. Who was the one? The Gemara goes back to its proof that Rabbi Akiva was chayzer. When it comes to his limud of bikurim, he agrees now with Rabbi Yosef HaGlili, as we pointed out before. Now asks the Gemara to build up this proof. Man shamas lei de omar b'maiser sheni nofik bei. Who was the one indeed who said that maiser sheni is yes able to be used for your matzah? And as we point out on the Brisa on the top of Amud Aleph, that was indeed Rabbi Akiva, says the Gemara. And he was the one who was memayit, he excluded the bikurim from being used for matzah from the pasuk chomosh v'seichem, because it's not included in all of your dwellings. Shmamina hadar. It must be that Rabbi Akiva was the one who was chayzer boy. Indeed, he agrees with Rabbi Yossi HaGlili that bikurim is excluded for the reason because you cannot eat the bikurim in any other place other than Yerushalayim. And the pasuk Gabi Matzos says, you shall eat your matzos in all of your dwellings. Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Tepuk le milechem oini. Let Rabbi Yossi HaGalili learn out more easily from lechem oini. In other words, let Rabbi Yossi HaGalili learn out that Bikurim is excluded because lechem oini. Why does he have to come to the pasuk of b'chol moshvei seichem? Misha noichal ba'oini yatzeh she'ein noichal ela b'simcha. Nechal ba'oini yatzeh she'ein nechal ela b'simcha. Just like he learned out that Meiser Sheni is excluded because one cannot eat Meiser Sheni be'aninus, and matzah is called lechem oini, a lashon of aninus. So too then he should learn out that one cannot eat bikurim because of the same reason. Says the Gemara, Sover like Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Yossi HaGalili holds like the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya bikurim asurin la'oinen. The Tana Kam over here says that bikurim is prohibited from the oinen. The oinen cannot eat bikurim in his state of aninus. So therefore the kohen is excluded if he's an oinen from eating bikurim. Rabbi Shimon matir, but Rabbi Shimon says he is permitted to eat the bikurim even in a state of aninus, of grief. So therefore we see that Rabbi Yossi could not have used this limud to exclude bikurim. My time with the Rabbanon, asked the Gemara, what is the reason for the Rabbanon? After all, the Rabbanon, why do they say that indeed, when it comes to the inyan of bikurim, they come and they exclude the bikurim from being used for matzah? Dichsiv, it says in the pasuk, Lo sucha le'echol b'sha'arecha. You are not able to eat b'sharecha in your gates. I'll read the entire pasuk, at least part of it. It says Lo sucha le'echol b'sharecha, and then it leaves a whole list of ma'aser degoncha v'siroishcha v'itzarecha, and it calls it a bechoros. At the end of the pasuk, it says utrumas yadcha, and here we define that Trumas Yadcha is really a reference to Bikurim. So it brings the pasuk, says the Gemara, Dichsiv, Lo sucha le'echel b'sharecha. You're not able to eat in your gates, in Yerushalayim. V'omar mar, Trumas Yadcha elu Bikurim. And that's including Bikurim, which is stated as Trumas Yadcha in the pasuk. V'iskish Bikurim le'maiser. And we make a hekesh between Bikurim and Maiser. Ma meiser iser la'oinen, just as meiser cannot be eaten by somebody who's in a state of oininus, of grief. Af bikur mas oser la'oinen. So too, the bikurim are also then oser la'oinen. In other words, the Rabbanon, that's the reason why they, before in the Tana Kama, that was the Tana Kama's opinion, who was arguing Rabbi Shimon, that explained that bikurim is osur la'oinen. This is the source. Rabbi Shimon Shuma Krainu Rachmana. Rabbi Shimon says the Torah at the end of the day doesn't say the word bikurim. It says Chumas Yadcha. It calls it Chuma. Although it's granted a reference to bikurim, but it doesn't say it as bikurim. It calls it Chuma. So it says Rabbi Shimon, Ma Truma, it has to be Kitruma, it has to be like Truma. Ma Truma Muteres La'oinin. Just as Truma is permitted to the kohen who is in a state of aninus, Af bikurim mutar la'oinin. So too then, bikurim is also mutar be'oinin, and therefore this is the source of Rabbi Shimon, who says that a kohen can yes eat his bikurim be'aninus. Rabbi Shimon nehi dahakish les le simcha mia michtav ksiva behu. Granted, the hekesh he does not have then. But what about, nonetheless, it's written in the pasuk, simcha. In regards to bikurim, it states in the pasuk, and you shall rejoice in all that you have, all the good. A reference to the bikurim. Answers Rabbi Shimon, hahu lizman simchahu da'asa. It's not referring to the actual eating of the bikurim. It's talking about the time that you can then go ahead and the zman of the simcha that you will then bring the bikurim and make the psukim. You will then make you'll state the psukim by the mizbech, what's called the kriya. There's two parts of bikurim. One aspect of bikurim, one requirement is bringing the bikurim to the mizbeach, giving to the kohen. But there's a second mitzvah of bikurim, which refers to the kriya, reading the psukim of Arami Ovid Av Ovi. So that which you can read the Psachim, which is called the mitzvah of Kriya, is only at the time of Simcha. And explains, Disnan Matzeres vi'ad hachag meviv kare. Between Shavuos and Sukkot, that's a time of Simcha, and therefore you have two mitzvahs to bring the Bikurim to Yerushalayim and give it to the Kohen, put it on the Mizbeach, and you also have then the mitzvah of Kare, being Kare, the Psukim. Mehachag v'ad Chanukah meviv eino Kare. When between Sukkot and Chanukah, you only have one of the two mitzvahs of bringing the Bikurim, but you don't have the mitzvah of Kriya, because not a Zman of Simcha. Tonu Rabbanon. Oh, so therefore that's the opinion of Rabbanon, that's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that states in regards to Bikurim. Tonu Rabbanon, that Gemara turns to a brayso that states, in terms of eating the matzah, what things are maybe excluded from being able to eat matzah with. Lechem oini, in regards to matzah, this pasuk says, lechem of oini, lechem of oni, poor man's bread. Prat, this comes to exclude, lechalut ula ashisha. The chalut means that it was made with scalding water, by putting it into scalding water. Ula ashisha, when it's made in a big size, those things are excluded as not being lechem oini, and therefore you cannot use that for your matzah. Yachol, I might think, says the brayso, lo yetze adam yidei chavasai ella bepas hadro. I might think you can only fulfill your mitzvah of matzah when the pas is taking out all of its hidur, all of its beauty. Dainu, it's not white, it's only going to be dark. That has only the bran inside. Talmud loimer matzois riba. Therefore the pasuk and adds matzois to teach me there's a ribui. Afilu ki matzois shel shloimo, even the most refined type of flour like Shlomo HaMelech had used. Im Kain asked the Gemara, Matamu loimar lechem oini. This is still the brayso. Why does it then teach lechem oini? Says the brayso, prat lechalut v'la ashisha, to exclude again that which was made in scalding water, and that which is a very big type of loaves. How do we know? Because it's large, it has a lashon of chashivus. This matzah called ashisha. Dichsiv will bring you a pasuk that indicates when David HaMelech, he was mechalik the various breads. You see that he was mechalik a very large amount and used such a lashon vashisha. Says in the pasuk, "Vayichalik lekol ham," when he apportioned to the entire nation, lekol hamoin Yisrael, to all of the populace of Klal Yisrael, lemeish ve'ad isha, from man to woman, leish chalas lechem achas ve'eshbar echod ve'ashisha echos. To each one he gave a lechem, was eshbar, one eshbar, and one ashisha. V'amar Rav Chanan bar Abba, and he comes to explain these words. What does it mean? Eshbar is a combination of the words echa mishisha bepar. He gave 1/6 of a bull, tremendous amount of meat. Ashisha echa mishisha be'efa. When he portioned the bread, he gave 1/6 of an ephah, a tremendously big amount of bread. Upliga de Shmuel, and this argues on how Shmuel explains the pasuk. The Omar Shmuel ashisha garba de chamra. Ashisha, the reference to the jugs of wine. The Chsiv, it says va'ohave ashishe anofim. To my beloved ones, they are the ashisha, the jugs of grapes.